A few years ago, if you looked at my bank account, you probably would have assumed I was failing financially. I wasn't making a huge salary. I didn't have rich parents funding my life. I wasn't some crypto genius who got lucky overnight. Honestly, I was just a regular person trying to survive month to month while quietly stressing about money almost every day. And that's why hitting a $100,000 net worth felt unreal to me. Not because it made me rich overnight, but because growing up, six figures sounded like something only wealthy people reached. Especially without a high-paying job. I used to think you needed to earn massive amounts of money to build real financial security, but eventually I realized something important. Building wealth and looking wealthy are completely different things. Most people never learn that distinction. When I started my financial journey, I made the same mistake a lot of people make in their 20s. Every time I earned money, I spent most of it trying to improve my lifestyle immediately. Better clothes, better food, new gadgets, random online purchases that felt exciting for a few days before becoming meaningless. I wasn't reckless, but I was financially unconscious. Money came in and disappeared just as fast. And honestly, the most frustrating part was that I worked hard. I truly believed hard work alone would eventually solve my financial problems. But year after year, my savings barely grew because my habits stayed the same. That was the first lesson that changed everything. Income matters, but behavior matters more than most people realize. I know people who earn impressive salaries but stay financially stressed because they spend everything they make. And I know people earning average incomes who quietly build strong financial stability because they live intentionally. At some point, I stopped asking, how can I look more successful? And started asking, how can I become financially harder to break? That mindset shift changed my life. The first thing I did was become brutally honest about where my money was actually going. And honestly, that process was painful. I realized how much money disappeared into convenience spending, emotional purchases, subscriptions I barely used, and lifestyle habits that brought temporary pleasure but no long-term value. The scary part is that most financial problems don't come from one massive mistake. They come from hundreds of small decisions repeated every month. Ordering food constantly. Upgrading things unnecessarily. Buying things emotionally when stressed or bored. Living for short-term comfort while ignoring long-term freedom. That's how people stay financially trapped for years without understanding why. So instead of trying to become rich quickly, I focused on controlling my financial leaks first. Not in an extreme way. I didn't stop enjoying life completely. I didn't become obsessed with saving every dollar. But I started spending intentionally instead of emotionally. That difference matters more than people think. Another thing that changed my financial life was understanding lifestyle inflation. This is the invisible trap that keeps millions of people stuck. Every time income increases, lifestyle increases too. So even though people technically earn more money, they still feel broke because their expenses grow at the same speed. I realized if I wanted to build wealth without a huge salary, I had to avoid upgrading my lifestyle every single time I earned more. That discipline created breathing room financially for the first time in my life. And instead of spending all extra income, I started buying assets. At first, the amounts were small. Small investments. Small savings goals. Small contributions into my future. Honestly, in the beginning it felt almost pointless because progress looked slow. Social media makes wealth look instant. But real financial growth is usually boring at first. Months can pass where it feels like nothing is changing. That's why most people quit too early. But eventually something interesting happens. Consistency starts compounding. Small savings become larger savings. Investments begin growing quietly. Financial stress slowly decreases. And for the first time, you stop feeling like every emergency could destroy your life. That feeling is incredibly powerful. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about building wealth is believing they need a perfect situation first. A better job, more income, more opportunities, more luck. But honestly, a lot of financial progress comes from optimizing the situation you already have instead of constantly waiting for the ideal one. I didn't suddenly wake up making six figures. I focused on improving my skills gradually, increasing income where possible, and most importantly, keeping the gap between income and lifestyle wide enough to build assets consistently. That gap changes everything. Because wealth is often built in the space between what you earn and what you spend. And sadly, most people erase that gap completely through lifestyle inflation. Another huge turning point for me was learning about investing properly. Growing up, investing sounded complicated and intimidating. I assumed it was something only rich people understood. But eventually I realized investing is one of the biggest reasons wealthy people continue becoming wealthier. Money that sits still usually loses value over time because of inflation. Money invested intelligently has the potential to grow. And once I truly understood compound growth, I became almost obsessed with starting as early as possible instead of waiting until I felt rich enough to invest. Time matters far more than people realize financially. Even average investments repeated consistently over years can completely change someone's future. That realization motivated me massively because for the first time, building wealth felt mathematically possible instead of emotionally impossible. I also had to stop comparing myself to people online. This was harder than I expected. Social media constantly makes normal people feel behind in life. You see luxury cars, expensive vacations, designer lifestyles, and overnight success stories every day. Eventually, saving money and living below your means starts feeling boring or embarrassing. But comparison is financially dangerous. Because once you become obsessed with appearances, smart decisions become emotionally difficult. You start spending to impress people who honestly aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think. That realization saved me a lot of money. One thing I learned during this journey is that real wealth is often invisible in the beginning. Nobody claps when you invest quietly. Nobody celebrates when you avoid unnecessary spending. Nobody notices your discipline at first. But years later, the results become impossible to ignore. And honestly, hitting a $100,000 net worth didn't magically solve every problem in my life. But psychologically, it changed something huge. For the first time, I no longer felt financially fragile. I felt stable. I felt capable. I felt like my future wasn't entirely dependent on surviving paycheck to paycheck forever. And that feeling mattered more than status ever could. The biggest lesson from my journey is this: you do not need a high-paying job to begin building wealth. What you need is awareness, discipline, patience, consistency, and the ability to stop sacrificing your future freedom for temporary comfort. Because most people stay broke not because they lack potential, but because nobody teaches them how powerful small financial habits become when repeated for years. I started with almost nothing financially. No huge salary. No secret advantage. No overnight success story. Just small changes repeated consistently long enough for them to finally compound into something real. And honestly, that's probably how most real wealth is built.